welcome, welcome. So Megan is with us today, and she is a former finance professional and corporate recruiter turned money and life design coach. She left the corporate world in 2018 and has been traveling the world ever since. She went from a $24K starting salary to traveling the world with her investments, making money for her. She's passionate about the idea that money can buy time and freedom and wants to help others live the lives of their dreams. She's based between New York City and Playa del Carmen, Mexico. Welcome, Megan. So exciting.
Thanks so much for having me, Catherine. I'm excited to be here.
Yes. So I love how when we first were talking about adaptability and the way that tied in with finance and the work that we've done together. But I so want to hear your story. And the first question that comes up for me is, how did you go from 24K salary to having all these investments making money for you?
It's a really good question. Yeah, in a way, and it's weird to think about this in retrospect, I think in some ways, having a really low starting salary in New York City kind of helps me in the long term because I had to be really mindful and conscious of my spending on that salary in New York City. And my first job out of college, I was working in a magazine. And as you know, it's kind of a glamour industry. The pay is not very high. And then from there, I started a job in the finance industry where it was still an entry-level salary in finance, but it was quite a bump from what I had been making. And working in finance, I learned to invest, which became a very valuable skill. And also having now an increase in salary from what I had been making to what I was making, and working in finance for a company where they not only taught us to invest, but you did have the opportunity to have one of the portfolio managers invest money for you as an employee perk. There was some motivation for me to take some of my pay increase and decide, all right, before this hits my bank account and before I even feel this, let me take some of this money and invest it before I even see it. And so that was the start of investing for me, which I might not have had otherwise. And then from there, as you're working, you get pay increases. And because I learned going from my first job to my second job to kind of keep some of that pay increase for myself, that was really good training to continue to do that throughout my corporate career. And having the knowledge to be able to invest, I did that and continued to invest as my income grew, which did result in having a nice little nest egg down the road.
That's so amazing. And the fact that you had the understanding or the consciousness of knowing to do that, right? Because a lot of people out of college, maybe they don't know what they actually want to invest in down the line. They don't know, but maybe they also don't know what to do, right? Like, okay, so I have this money and what's in front of me is what I'm going to spend it on, right? I'm wanting to walk through the mechanics of your process, your mindset, to how you were able to do that so early on. And if maybe you had some of that modeled in your life through your relatives or I know that going to a finance firm was really important, and you probably got to see firsthand how money compounds and how all these things can add up. But I'm just curious to see and understand your process to get to that place to say, I'm going to build a nest egg, and this is how I'm going to do it.
That's a really good question. Yeah, I think there's so many levels to your question, and it is really interesting because thinking back, I do wonder, had I not gotten this job in finance, would I have started to invest on my own? And I don't know the answer to that question because I think having the opportunity to do it, I was perhaps somewhat primed for the idea of doing it in the sense that growing up, my father always tried to get me interested in the stock market, and he would tell me about it and try to show me things. And he would also tell me about my grandmother as being someone who had invested in the stock market. And she was an immigrant. So my dad's mother came over from Ireland, and she came over with, not much money in her pocket. Came over, I think she knew someone from Ireland who was here in the US. And so, she had some knowledge. She maybe had connections to a job when she came over. But my dad always tells this story. She got a job in a rectory, working in a church for the priest. And room and board was included with her job. So she had a little bit of a nest egg. Like, any money she made was hers. Obviously she had some expenses, but nothing major because room and board was included. But somehow he tells the story of she got hooked up with some stockbroker. I think he was, again, maybe an Irish guy in the US who was part of the immigrant network. And, luckily for her, he was a good dude who taught her how to invest. And my dad is like, he still had the stock certificate, some of the original stocks that she bought back in the day.
Wow.
And so she started investing with what little money she had. And she would buy companies like AT&T, companies that still exist. And my father describes her as being someone who, came over from Ireland with nothing. And then, throughout her lifetime, really kind of amassed some real money. At the end of her life, she owned, I think, the property she lived in, and she had a rental house. And she actually had amassed some assets. And, he always talked about that as being something that was really kind of remarkable that she'd been able to do that as somebody with a third grade education.
Wow. That is I just love that story so much because, well, it was your grandma. And was she by herself when she came over, or was she married? What was her situation like?
Yeah, she came over by herself. And I think she had a friend who came over, and I believe a sister followed her over years later once she established herself and had a foothold in the US. But she didn't meet my grandfather, I think, until she was maybe even in her 30s. So she kind of got married later in life. And this was during the Great Depression too. So my father describes how his father worked for one of the government organizations that happened during the Great Depression. One of was the president at the time. I should know this. I think it was the WPA, one of these Great Depression organizations that, he moved upstate somewhere in New York to work for the park system. And so the Great Depression kind of set people back, just because of the financial situation at the time. So they didn't meet until, I think, after that, after kind of the Great Depression, after he came back from wherever he'd been working upstate. So they met in their 30s and then got married and whatever. But I got the impression that my grandmother was the one who really had the financial knowledge, and she was the one who had started investing. And so she was the one kind of controlling the family purse strings and let's invest in this rental property and things like that.
It's just, I just love this story so much. And I didn't even know this before, right? We've talked, and it's so beautiful to see the legacy that she has left you and your family and what that means, and how it's almost there's this full circle moment where you are getting to help people who are in the same position and maybe who haven't had that legacy to be able to think of money differently. And I also love that, she did all of this during a time where it was difficult to do. Not just because she was an immigrant, but also because of the times, the Depression. And so the fact that, we're facing so many changes in the world right now where people are trying, we're kind of dismantling this idea of, first of all, what is work, right? Who am I and what do I want to do in the world now? And then you add on top of that what's happening financially and how that's going to shape what we actually do, what we gravitate towards in terms of where's my time best spent to be able to really grow? And so how can we use this time that feels like there's, the stock market is down or, all these things are happening at the same time. And how can we use this time to really use the example of your grandmother and build wealth, right? And how can we adapt to what's happening currently and find a financial model that works for us? So I'm going to let you talk about that because you're the expert. So I was wondering, for those of us that are here and that are listening and part of this journey with you, where do we even start, right? So I guess maybe we can talk to 3 different perspectives. One, if you're just now getting started in your career, or you're somewhere in the middle of it and you have a job and now you want to actually build wealth, and despite the financial situation or any circumstance around you, right?
Yeah.
And then I would say the second group is if you've already started, but you want to see more momentum in what you're doing. So maybe let's just start with those 2. Where do we start, Megan?
Okay. All right. I think you raise a really good point that things feel really hard right now, right? Or people feel like it's hard, and people look at the economy or the stock market. And I hear this from my clients all the time. I have some clients who are like, oh, I should have invested years ago. The market is already so much. It's up from however many years ago. I've missed the boat. And then other people look at the market and they're like, obviously now is a down year. So some of my clients who maybe started investing a year ago are seeing negative return, and they're discouraged by that. And I would say, actually, like, if you are a net investor in the stock market and you're buying stocks today, now is actually a really good time to be buying because you're getting a discount on prices from a year ago. So while it might be difficult to look at your account and see negative returns, when you put money in every month, you're now buying more shares this month than you did a year ago for the same dollar amount. And the stock market's going to go back up. Though it is a really good time to be putting money in. And I think that's maybe a good takeaway, that in the present moment, people tend to see what's working against them and always think people who started years ago had it better. Times are different now. I've missed the opportunity. And you really haven't. And we forget that people in the past had difficult times too, like the Great Depression. That happened in the 30s, and people investing then, that was a very scary time to be investing money. But if you invested money during the Great Depression, then when you came out of the Great Depression, it bounced back, and it was actually a really good time to be investing if you were able to. So I guess the takeaway is, it's never a bad time to get started. There's always opportunity there, and the world will continue. People will continue to be innovative. People will continue to start businesses. Companies that are listed on the stock market will continue to grow and produce goods and services that people need and that people buy. And so the value of the stock market is going to continue to rise over time, as it has since we started tracking the stock market. People are always like, well, the past doesn't necessarily indicate what's going to happen in the future. And that's true. But if you believe in the spirit of humanity and that people are going to continue to produce goods and services that are going to add value that we're still going to need and buy, unless there's a zombie apocalypse, like that, it will continue to happen regardless of the situation. Now, will the stock market continue to go up at the same rate that it has historically? I don't know. We don't know. Nobody knows. It might go up on average more. It might go up less. We really don't know. But I think it's pretty safe to say that it goes up over time, and there's never a bad time to get in. So no matter where you're at with your finances, start today. And the sooner the better, because the effect of compounding. Compounding kicks in the second you start putting money in. So you may as well start sooner rather than later.
Right. So if I'm just going to come up with a scenario. Let's say I'm paying a mortgage and I'm in an area that's really expensive and, I'm buying all the things that I need and I still feel like maybe I don't have the money to set aside, right? What are the next steps? And I love this part of it because, I have felt that way myself too, thinking this is all mindset and beliefs. I'm going to get to that. But also, this feeling of there's never enough time or there's never enough money, right? And the reason that's really about flipping the story and saying, wait a minute, I'm the one that creates this abundance, right? And in co-creation with the divine. And I get to decide how I want to look at this. So I could have all the time in the world and really feel it and experience that. And I could have all the money to do the things that I need to do and to take care of my priorities. But how do we even start to begin to see that in a practical way? And I think that's one of the things that I love about your approach is that you're not just pie in the sky, here's this thing, and if you change your mindset, this will happen. Through numbers, you're able to actually see how, even when you have quote unquote very little, there's actually so much there and so many resources by getting clear on your priority. And I'm going to just let you take it from there. But I just want you to walk us through that process and through the magic of really seeing the numbers and looking at it from the perspective that you see it, right? It's not just about a budget that feels constraining, but what's your take on where you start to see that and to help yourself with the numbers to also get hope and freedom?
Yeah, I think that mindset work obviously helps. This is a mindset practice because you do have to approach this with a positive attitude of, I know this is possible. It's just a question of how is this possible and how can I make this happen for myself? And at the same time, so many people are so reluctant to actually sit down and look at the numbers. And when people are afraid to look at their numbers, I think is often a fear element that is going into that, right? There's a limiting belief where you maybe believe that if you look at the numbers, it's going to kind of like refute the mindset work. But in reality, I find that you can only go so far with mindset alone, because at a certain point, you need to take action, and action actually coupled with mindset propels you that much further. So there's the mindset aspect, but then looking at the numbers and actually saying, okay, how do I go from where I'm at now to creating even more spaciousness in my finances to invest in myself? And then once you do that, there's a compounding effect that then kind of gives the mindset a boost, because now you're not just thinking it, but you're seeing it in action. I don't know if that resonates, but yeah, there's an element of like, it can at first feel maybe restrictive to people to cut things, but cutting things and saying, this is not necessarily getting me where I want to go. And here is where I would rather put those resources. And then once you allocate them to where you want to go, whether it's paying off debt or investing in yourself to take a course or a class or start a business or do something that's going to make your future better versus ordering takeout or whatever it might be, then you start to see that slight shift in maybe not even a lot of money, but seeing that shift from a liability column to an asset, and you see that compound to literally change your life.
Yeah. And I think what I experienced working with you is, and, I want to again mention, I came from a family who my grandmother taught herself how to read with the Bible. She didn't finish high school until she was, I think, late 70s or 80s. And she did it because she was like, I'm capable and I'm going to do it. And she wanted that achievement, right? And that's only on one side of the family. But if I look at where I came from and what I've been able to accomplish and to be able to work with someone, I think one of the biggest pieces of advice that I got is, if there's a place in your life where you're trying to move to another level, get some sort of coaching, help, assessment, whatever it might be, somebody to look over your shoulder, somebody that is not your brain, because as we hear, 2 brains are better than 1. So I have been working through this for years, right? I've developed all kinds of like geolocation spreadsheets that tied one to another, and I would change the color and I would do this other thing. And I realized, you know what? I keep trying different systems and I'm doing it with my own brain, but it's time to bring someone in to help me see it from a different perspective. And I think that's what I want to encourage everybody to do, no matter where in your journey you are, even if you're already getting your investment to make so much for you and you're at a really good place. And if you want to get to the next level, seek someone that can help you figure out what really to do next. And I think that's one of the things that I learned from you, was that even though we were talking the same language and I was saying budget, I was saying cash flow, I was saying, some of like these other words, how I was looking at it in my own experience was different than how you were approaching it in action. And that really, I have such a beautiful relationship with my strategy and my planning. I get giddy just thinking about it. When I put it on my to-do list, it's just like, oh, it's this warm and fuzzy feeling. You know why? Because I feel empowered that I know that there's resources. It doesn't matter how big, how small. It doesn't matter. The number doesn't matter. That's really what I learned, right? It's whatever number you have, using that number, knowing how to work with your own intuition and priorities to manage those resources is so incredibly empowering. And just knowing what to do, right? Knowing how to, I want to give a more concrete example, but I'd love to also hear from you because, you work with many, many clients who come from many different backgrounds. But it's, I think that's what it is. The empowerment comes from just knowing that no matter what the number is, I have the ability to really connect with what priority is so important for me right now and to provide for myself in the present moment, while also understand that I'm wanting to get to this other place and then looking at the future Catherine and loving her through action today. So it's those two things. How do I love myself in action today with my resources and provide for her then, while also taking care of me now and what I need now? And how do I also work through that adaptation, right? Because every day is different. One day I'm in Colombia, another day I'm in the US, another day. And the economy is different everywhere I go. So how do you adapt? I said a lot, so I want you to have a chance to answer to that empowerment. And then we can talk about how we can work with our ever-changing needs as we're getting to know better who we are, while also taking care of our future self.
Yeah, totally. Well, I'm thinking of it, I wanted to touch on, you said something about that it doesn't matter the amount, like just get started. And I think there's so much power to that momentum builds upon itself. So I think people get overwhelmed because they think, oh, I can't possibly cut that much or cut anything or whatever. It's like to your point, it really almost doesn't matter. Just get started. And no matter how small the amount, then you start to kind of get momentum and see a difference. And then you become inspired to find a new way to create more space. And sometimes there's only so much you can cut. It might be a matter of saying, okay, well, I see a difference. How do I make more income? How do I bring more money in so that I then have more to invest? But yeah, what you say is really important, that these are like core principles of like, it's kind of about finding your own internal compass as far as the life you want to create for yourself, right? And I think so many of us we kind of operate on autopilot, right? There's a lot of parallels I see between getting your money in order and a mindfulness practice. Because if you're not practicing like meditation or mindfulness, it's very easy to just go on autopilot and be like very reactive to the outside world and what's going on right now in this situation. Someone comes at you, you react. And a lot of us operate that way with our money. We're reacting to everyone else's demands, media images that tell us we should buy this, that we're not good enough, that we need to look a certain way. We need the new dress. We need this new product. And that literally never stops until we kind of look at ourselves and say, what's important to me and what life do I want to create for myself? And how do I harness my energy and resources to create that life? Obviously, your whole business is energy. And when you really think about it, money is a form of energy. It literally is. Mm-hmm. We go out there, we have a job, we own a business, we spend our time working and producing goods or value in the world, and we get paid. And money is literally just like a store of that energy that we've put out there. People are literally paying us for our energy and we store it. And then it's up to us to decide, what do we want to use that energy to create? And like you say, there's so much going on in the world that it's very easy to react and just give our energy away without thinking about, what do I want to create for myself? And so getting to your point that those principles of what you want to create for yourself in the world are kind of essential and core to who you are. And they really don't change or shouldn't change related to the external environment. Although, to your point, the external world does change. And right now we're potentially heading into, or we are officially in a recession, I guess, right? Like this is a recessionary environment. So to prepare for that, to prepare your finances in general, as you know, like you first have to have a foundation of security. And we should want that for ourselves, right? Like having an emergency fund, literally some money set aside. So if there's an emergency, if you like, as you know, I injured myself recently, I fell and I fractured my heel. Emergencies come up, right? You injure yourself and then you have bills that you didn't anticipate. And if you don't have money to take care of that, then that can really set you back, right? And so it's so important to have money for that sort of thing. And particularly in an environment like we're in now, where we're in a recession, the price of goods has gone up. Companies are doing layoffs. So I think people are feeling a bit more insecure with their finances. And you should always have an emergency fund. But in this sort of environment, it's really important to have an emergency fund because it just feels that much more real that there is the potential that your company that you work for can do layoffs, or the price of eggs are going up. And so people have less money to spend money on buying goods and services. So perhaps if you're a business owner, your business might slow down because people don't have as much discretionary income to spend money with you, things like that. So you want to have money bank so that you can prepare for that without being at the mercy of the external world. By that, I mean, like, if you lose your job, and the difference between having a very, like, a robust emergency fund where you feel comfortable versus not having one where you feel comfortable is the difference between having to potentially take a job that you aren't excited about or that underpays you simply because you need to pay your bills versus if you have a very comfortable emergency fund and you get laid off, then getting laid off might actually not even be that bad. It might be an opportunity to relax a little, enjoy some time off, and really use it as an opportunity to think about, what do I want my next step to be? And I can interview for jobs with the luxury and leisure of thinking about what I want to do next, really pushing for the next role that's going to be what I want to do next. And I can also hold out for a better salary, or I have more leverage to negotiate because I'm not pressed to come up with money for rent.
Yeah. And there's two things you said. One, that money is it is energy. And for those that know what capacitors are, it's like a capacitor. It stores it, but it needs to also discharge. If you don't discharge it in an intentional way to a particular device, it's going to trickle charge out, right? It's going to eventually not hold the charge. And there's differences, and depends on what, materials you're using and the capacitors, the new capacitors that are out there. But what's really important about that point that you made is it's important for money to flow, right? It's much important to receive as it is to give. And so because we are in a world where money has to flow in order for it to hold its value, then it's important to be really intentional about where it goes. And the only way you can be intentional about that is by you yourself being intentional about what your values are and what your priorities are. And I love that you said, wait, but those don't change. So here I am talking about, life changes and circumstances. It's true, but you're right. Our values, what we're built on, that doesn't change. If you listen to yourself 15 years ago or 10 years ago versus now, there is a through line that is still the same, that's you. It's your soul and what you came here to do and your purpose. So that to me is so important, to be able to account for every single penny, for every single dollar with intentionality. If anything, if you don't believe it'll get anywhere, at least for the sake of being a steward, a really good steward of the gift you've been given, to then be able to give, in return. And when I think of giving, I think of it as giving back to the economy by hiring a coach, for example, right? Giving back to the economy by buying the product that is important to you, and maybe you have to replenish every single month, right? You're giving. And you can set an intention that everything you give comes back to you multiplied. Because you're helping a company, you're helping whatever it is. Another reason to be really conscious about where you do spend your money, right? In companies that have values that align with yours and that are helping the planet, or they're, helping people. So yeah, that was so important. And you mentioned another one, and it was the last point that you made around saving and having an emergency fund, right? Sometimes it can be counterintuitive to think that by setting money aside like that, like, oh, but I should be spending it over here, or I should be lowering debt, or I should, whatever it might be. But by being your own safety net, you're actually creating a cascade of safety all around you. because that debt is going to get paid on its own. When I say on its own, right? Like what you intentionally, make sure to do that. But it's a fascinating law, right? Of how when you take care of yourself, love yourself first, right? Fill your cup first, then you're able to be there for others. And coming from a Latin family, there's this belief that we're here, and maybe other cultures have the same thing, where you are meant to take care of your parents as they get older. And, first of all, question mark, right? Does that really have to be true? Right? But I challenge that thought from the person, and this is something I'm actually working through, like hot off the press, right? What does that really mean? What does that look like? And for me, what I've decided is it means that I take care of myself right now. I take care of living my life and allow other people around me to do whatever it is they're going to do, to live out their life however they're going to live it. But by me taking care of me, it puts me in a position where I can then actually help when the time comes, if it's even necessary, right? By that, also by my example of taking care of that, it's so easy to want to help. And I come from such a giving family, and I do love that legacy that I've been given.
Right.
Of being so giving, right? Like money is not, it's just like, here, like you need help, here you go. And I love that. But I think there's a balance, right? I feel like I'm in a more powerful place to be able to give and to be that shade. I always had this picture of being a tree in the middle of the desert that gives this shade and water and abundance to the people, to the animals that are, underneath this tree. And all of us have the opportunity to be that for each other when we take care of our own self that way. Yeah.
I love everything you just said, because there's so much truth to that. And I do see that a lot with my clients. I do have a number of clients who do have responsibilities to family and parents and siblings, nieces and nephews, and they want to be able to do that. And I have one client in particular that we've spent a lot of time kind of like shifting the mindset around that, where she is still able to help, but now able to help in a much more meaningful way, and now take better care of herself at the same time. And I kind of equate it again to the like meditation metaphor, where like when you meditate, and I'm trying to be better about meditating. It's like something I aspire to do every day. I'm doing it more, but like the point of meditating, right, is that you work on your response time. So you respond rather than react in panic, right? You meditate so that when the world comes at you, you pause and take a breath and think about like, okay, how can I respond rather than react, respond meaningfully? And the concept of taking care of yourself first and having an emergency fund enables you to take that breath and respond rather than react in panic when you have family members or people coming to you and they're in an emergency situation and you're just reacting and plugging holes and throwing money at the situation, where then you're worse off. And you also maybe haven't solved the problem in a long-term meaningful way, because we're just plugging holes rather than like fixing things from the ground up. And the difference being, this client now, she has an emergency fund, and rather than reacting to family needs where it's like, oh, we need new things for back to school, or, her nieces need and of course want like really cute clothes for back to school. Let me get my emergency fund in order. Let me start investing. So like, I feel like my cup is full. And now I have investments where the mindset is I'm thinking about how I can help people in a long-term meaningful way with things like paying for college. Can I hold investments years from now to be able to help you buy textbooks when you start school, versus just reacting when we're in Target and buying things. And not to say that of course you want to be able to buy like fun stuff for your nieces, but it's like, how much do I want to be doing that and buying like short-term stuff versus the long-term stuff? And you can do both. It's just in what proportion.
Yeah, that's so true. I wondered what kind of blockage, like emotional blockages, have you encountered or maybe beliefs around financial mindset? And maybe you want to share your own or your clients, but I'm just curious to know what kinds of things have you seen? And then also, or maybe just the other way around, right? What kinds of aha moments have people had? Like, I used to think this way, and now I realize this about approaching money this way.
That's a good one. I mean, so many, and we're always unlocking new levels, right? Like, I am a money coach and I'm constantly like unlocking new level. I think it a lot of the times amounts to worthiness. And what am I worthy of? Am I worthy of having money? Am I worthy of holding on to money? Am I worthy of being provided for? And then once you get past that, with me, it's like, okay, am I worthy of like this luxury item? When you can start to, because sometimes there's a big gap between like, okay, I can afford this, but do I feel like I should? I feel guilty about spending this money. So there's always new levels with, and I think so much of it comes down to, and a lot of this is just first the awareness, right, of the messages that you heard growing up. I have a lot of clients who will say that they realize that their thoughts about money come from what their parents used to say growing up about rich people, right? Fundamentally, I encourage everyone to think about, what do you think of rich people? If you think of rich people, literally rich people are, and fill in the blank, what comes up for you? Because I think a lot of people have really negative views, and we're taught unconsciously, like, rich people are this, they're bad, evil, whatever. We aren't that. We're not rich and we're not bad and evil. So if you think that rich people are bad and evil, how can you ever then decide to be rich? That is a really common block that people have.
Yeah, that is such a good question to ask ourselves. Maybe as a starting point, what do I think about rich people? What do I think about, and I would put a number on it. What do you think about millionaires? What do I think about billionaires? Right? And then you'll be surprised what comes out. I've actually done this exercise. And I started when I was a child, when I was months old, because believe it or not, before you can even talk, or even if you don't have recollection of that time, energetically, things were imprinted on you through the circumstances that you lived. So let's say you were little, you were 5 months old, and your father leaves you, it's because of financial reasons, or like something happens financially. Some of that stuff, it does get in our subconscious in a way that we don't know until we start exploring it. So I would say journaling about, what does money mean to me? What is this for? My biggest thing for me around money has been that, well, first of all, I never focused on it growing up. I wanted to be a missionary, and I wanted to go and help people. And it was my dad that said, you should probably have a vocation. So you're not going anywhere until you have some sort of skill set, which was really wise for him to say. But even when I got into my vocation, I wasn't thinking about how much engineers make. I had no idea. I just knew I loved solving problems and I loved math. And I just went for it. And even starting my business, it wasn't about the money. It was about having the ability to be creative and flexible and right. So I realized throughout time that for me, the focus is really on abundance and richness of experience. And to me, richness of experience includes being an incredible steward of the resources that I have and playing around with it to be able to increase my bucket and my ability to receive more and to give more. And it becomes a game. Like, okay, this is my current picture of myself from a financial perspective. This is a picture of myself from an emotional perspective, right? It's about when we start to isolate money as a topic, things can get distorted, right? Money, like you said, is energy. It's something that allows us to really have all of these experiences that are already a part of our life anyway without it, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people I know that have gone to live simpler lives and who just found so much freedom and happiness because that's what their soul wanted. It's just really coming down to what it is that you want and looking at a full picture, not just measuring yourself by how much you make or how much you're increased or whatever. You know, there's a lot of talk around there online about, you know, you can make this much or you should be making this or da-da-da. It's like, hold on a second. Let's just dial it down and figure out what is just the essence of who you are and what does that look like in all areas of life. One time I did a thing where I was like, okay, if I have all the money in the world, okay, so I'm going to figure out what my year looks like in living expenses, right? Doing all the things I want to do, whether it's staying at like huge luxury hotels or whatever it might be.
Right.
And I was surprised. That I didn't need as much as I thought I needed.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a big one for people. Like, love doing those exercises with clients where it's like, yeah, let's take a step back. And what does your dream life look like? What would you do for the next 5 years if you won the lottery? And like, a lot of the times it really comes down, and it's so trite, but like the best things in life are free almost. Not to say it's really nice to be able to stay at a really nice resort. And obviously, if I won the lottery tomorrow and you were like, what am I going to do for the next 5 years with lottery winnings? You'd probably like go all out for a little bit. And like, but at the end of the day, it really is about like the people you surround yourself with, how you spend your days, and like any income level. When people are like, when you talk with people about what would you do if you won the lottery, it's like, I'd spend time with my friends. I'd wake up and have a nice breakfast. I would read a lot more than I do or whatever. And those are the things that you can do at really any income level. So it is funny when it comes right down to it that if money becomes an unlimited resource, people's answers tend to be very similar. And it often doesn't revolve around, like you say, extreme luxury. It's really not that.
Exactly. I mean, if you asked me that question now, I would say I would still be doing what I'm doing. I would still be sitting here in front of you having this conversation, right? And we can always increase our capacity to receive more, and how that manifests. You know, I think we need to be flexible with that too and be kind to ourselves. And not judge ourselves for whatever. It's okay to grieve the loss of or the understanding. You know, I've been through that process where I looked at my stuff and I was like, wait a minute, how did I get here? Right? Like what happened? And I had to have a little cry and I had to be like, okay, well, but now I'm going to do something about it. And so I think there's room for grieving in this process, and then also just saying, okay, I am capable. I can do this, right? It's not just for certain kinds of people. I'm able to create the kind of life that is fulfilling and that feels this and this and this way, and then surrender the form because you're going to be surprised. So, oh my goodness, this is amazing. I want to play a little game, but before I do, just 3 rapid questions. Is there anything else you want to say about how people can approach their money in a way that just feels better?
I think I want to emphasize that last point you made, because I think it's really important that you're like, no matter how much money I had, I would still be sitting here and having this conversation and running the business that you're running, right? Like doing the things that you're doing.
Yeah.
And I want to emphasize that to people, because I think that's the whole point. It's really about life design. And we tend to put the cart before the horse for whatever reason as a society. Like, we are chasing money and then we think money dictates our lifestyle. But we can and should throw that whole model out the window. And it should be, let's think about the life I want to create. And then how do I fund lifestyle? And that's a whole different conversation. And it's really not as hard as people think it is. I think it actually becomes a lot easier when you start with the lifestyle and then back into the money piece of it.
So true. So true. And with or without money, we're still going to be the same people we are. So who do you want to be?
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to play a little game. Since, it's said that you are what you eat, then what would you be?
Oh gosh, that's such a tough one. I don't know. I'm like, I had mac and cheese for lunch. It's been a big finest, but I do love mac and cheese.
Okay. Awesome. Yes, I love all the different variations of mac and cheese. You know how there's like actual restaurants dedicated just to mac and cheese. Okay. What is your favorite destination for rest and relaxation?
Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, I love Mexico. Mexico is one of my favorite countries, period. I think people associate it with rest and relaxation, but it's also such a cultural destination. And so Mexico is up there. But I would also say like the mountains. And I think the more that I travel, I do find that I really enjoy peaceful mountain destination and not just the beach.
Yes. The mountains meeting the beach. That's so beautiful. Yes. If you could have any superpower, what would it be and why?
Ooh, good one. Good one. I think flying. I mean, I'm between that and being able to predict the future, but I think if you could predict the future, then life might get kind of boring. So maybe flying. Flying would be pretty convenient. I like to travel. You get places faster. Let's go with flying.
I like that one. Yes. Amazing. Oh my gosh, Megan, thank you so much for your time. I'm just so grateful to have met you and that you're doing this kind of work. I can't wait for people to find you and to knock on your door or give you a call. So how can people get a hold of you?
Yes.
And work with you?
You can find me on Instagram at the 9 to 5 travel chick. That's THE, the number 9, TO, the number 5 travel chick. And I would love to work with some of you. So some of you want to get your money in order and align your money with your life purpose. And ultimately, like we said in this conversation, it's really about life design. I would love to work with you on.
Amazing. And I 100% recommend Megan. Oh my goodness. I want everyone to work with you. That's why we're talking here. It's beyond just it's the actionable plan, it's mindset, it's everything together. And I feel like you really hear people. And I think that's so important. Yeah. You don't just have like a one strategy fits all. It's very tailored. And I think we need that in the world. So thank you again so much. And we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This has been so fun.
Yeah. what does it feel like to live a life where your money is working for you?
Yeah. So I think if you know about me and my background, obviously I was in corporate America for a long time. And I think that we have this prescribed notion of you go to school, you maybe graduate college, and then you get a job and you work in that job until you retire in your 60s. And we also aren't necessarily encouraged to think that much about what we really, really want to do for a job. At least I think I didn't necessarily. And I was in the corporate world and I was like, this is not what I want to be doing with my time necessarily. I think that I would challenge that very notion that we've been taught, that you have this very standard cookie cutter timeline of life. And at a certain point, I always wondered if there was a way to do things a bit differently, or I knew I wasn't happy doing what I was doing, but how do you make that shift? And because I'd been investing and because I had money saved, I guess I thought or knew at some point, maybe I can take a sabbatical. Maybe I can do something differently. How do I figure that out? And it wasn't until I actually decided, when I got laid off, I decided to take time off and realized I have money saved. I can do that. And I stepped away from earning money and I literally saw my money invested in the stock market grow to the point where, and if I think about this today, it's weird to think about the fact that when I decided, okay, I'm going to take time off and not work for potentially a year, I expected that, okay, I have some cash. I'm going to spend that to travel and I'm going to just deplete that. And then I have money invested and it will maybe stay about the same. Maybe it'll go up a little bit. But I guess I thought that at the end of that year, I would be in a worse financial position than the start of the year because naturally I'm taking time off and spending money. Granted, the stock market had a fabulous year that year. I ended that year with a lot more money than I started the year. Not working.
Wow.
On a beach in Australia, in Bali, spending money, and came back. And I didn't even quite realize it at first, but, friends were like, oh, you must be really looking for a job. Former coworkers, oh, you're back. You must need a job. And I was like, no, looking at my bank account, I was kind of like, no, I'm actually not in that much of a rush. Like I can take my time, maybe take some more time off. And then I realized, I was like, wait a second. I actually have way more money than I thought that I would have if I reflect back on where I expected to be. And that was when I was like, wow, I knew this in theory that the stock market continues to grow your money. And that's not true every year because some years market does have a negative year, but it was a totally different thing to see that in action. And that's when I was like, this is real. And you literally can invest your money where you have investments that in theory can pay you a salary down the road if you start today. So that was the mental shift and reframe for me when I left my job and actually forced myself to see it in action and how that worked.
Wow. I think there's a lot of people that don't really see it to believe it, and it feels like maybe you're putting your money somewhere, but like, what's it really doing? Is it going to really grow? Is it really going to happen? And so I think that was so cool that you got an early opportunity to experience that and turn it all around and have your money make baby monies of its own, right? So that's really neat. I love that. Wow. Okay.